I want to thank Nicole for the invitation and to thank you all for being here. I've met some of you individually, but not all, as we were waiting to begin. And I think it's a privilege to be able to address you in the company of these two lovely ladies. I look forward to hearing their comments as well. And since I've been asked to open the proceedings, so to speak, I would love to share a funny story. Might as well have a little laugh as we get going. And that concerned my marriage to Jack, over here. Jack Josephson, who is a well-known Egyptologist and scholar. And when the word got out that Jack had got married, nobody knew quite to whom, it caused a furor because they said, Jack Josephson has gone and married an Egyptian ballet dancer. And of course, everybody was agog. And I think they looked forward to a lot of private entertainment, and I'm afraid I had to disappoint them. I wish I had been a ballet dancer sometimes. At least I'd have had a better bank account if I'd been a successful one. But I was a ballet dancer, and hence, of course, this strange, I think, contradiction in cultural terms. Whoever would associate classical ballet with Egypt or the Arab Middle East? And yet, I was part of what I realized, now of course, was an exceedingly interesting experiment. And it happened, I suppose, along a continuum that had been initiated much earlier. In the early 19th century, the modernization of Egypt, which I suppose we could also understand to be its westward inclination to Europe, essentially. And the father of this great movement, I guess, was maybe Napoleon, by invading Egypt and revealing Egypt to Europe. Muhammad Ali the Great, who is now credited with being the father of modern Egypt, and his descendants. So the Khedive Ismail, who was, I believe, his grandson, had ordered an opera house built in Cairo, and that was inaugurated in 1869 as part of the celebrations for the opening of the Suez Canal. So classical ballet first appeared, I am told, in Egypt with Giselle in 1872, if I'm not mistaken, according to one report. And there had been ballet and opera and theater and Western arts performed in Cairo to an increasingly large European community which came to settle in Egypt in the boom times. And this, of course, changed the cultural complexion of at least the capital cities. So I'm a product of the revolution, which occurred in 1952, the Egyptian Revolution. And very early on, there was this, as I was saying to Najwa a moment ago, my moment of opportunity, my window of opportunity. And I could never have been what I was if it had not been for this extraordinary coincidence of time, place, and circumstance. I don't think I could have become a prima ballerina of Egypt earlier, or I don't think now later, as we watch Egypt undergo yet another metamorphosis. So I consider myself to have been exceptionally fortunate as a Muslim and Arab woman to have had this opportunity, exceptional opportunity. And you were going to ask me, I think we'd better sort of change have the conversation we said we would. I've brought you some slides just to show you what was, because of course some of you may know that the Cairo Opera House burned down, or was burned down according to some, in 1971, and that caused an end to one career, and I have reinvented myself several times since. So,
why don't you show your slides?
Show my slides. Okay, well now. Let's give it a try. You'll have to bear with me if I mess up, because this is the first time I've ever done this. Myself, I should say, as Maria, my colleague Wadud Faizi as Zarema in Love Triangle, which, of course, the Egyptians do love a lot of Sturm and Drang, and the Khen Gire was the third part of that love triangle, in which resulted in the death of the two ladies. And this is me being cut out there, dying because I've just been killed by my rival. And the Khan, being thoroughly upset, had his other lady executed and ended up with none. Paquita, the classical ballet with Abdel Menem Kenin, who was just left the chairmanship of the Cairo Opera House. Don Quixote in Cairo. You see the corps de ballet. This is 1970. Daphnis and Chloe with the Chagall decorations, and Marc Chagall very kindly permitted the Cairo Opera House to reproduce his decor for the Paris Opera. So these are all Egyptians. This is myself at the Bolshoi Theatre, because I think, brag a bit and say that that was where my last performances took place, as a guest artist with the Bolshoi Ballet and the Kirov Ballet in Moscow. So that was taking bows at the Kirov after Giselle. Younger Egyptians, two students of mine performing in Moscow at a competition. We produce very fine male dancers, of all things. This is another of my students in the Corsair. And some of my experimenting in choreography based on Egyptian themes, which was something I wanted to explore. The Bride of the Nile. This is going back a bit myself, trying out a solo based on inspired by the traditional tahtib or stick dance. It was my first attempt at choreography at UCLA. Later choreography inspired by the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris. This is me as set, wrong sex, but never mind, I enjoyed performing it anyway. And Isis. And me, maybe unrecognizable, in Zar. And now, very quickly, the dances that were filmed in Egypt, dances, the film I made for my doctoral dissertation, starting with the Haggala, the Arab dance, the Bormeya from Siwa, all these exceedingly interesting and each one requiring individual research. The Mambuteya from Port Said, the Mambuteya in Detroit, at the invitation of the Smithsonian Institution, which was another marvelous experience in my life as presenter. Zar, Zikr, horse dancing, Tahtib, Nawazi, Kaf in Upper Egypt, Nubi. And there's your researcher in the back there, these marvelous Nubian dancers in Tushka in Upper Egypt, and the Sudanese, Ronga, and lastly the Bedouin martial dance of non-Arab Bedouin who are the Isharis, who live in the eastern desert of Egypt. So that was just a sort of quick overview.
For those of you right now showing at IFC, the International Film Center on 6th Avenue and 4th Street, is a film called First Position, a documentary film on young ballet dancers training for ballet. Nothing I've seen before really shows the incredible dedication, the incredible time the whole family has to put in, and the incredible effort that young people have to go through to prepare for a career in dance. So I think this is, it's worth seeing, but, and made me appreciate that. I've heard the stories here and there, but this is, now, Magda, what I want to ask you, because we're talking about controversies and professionalism. Your parents permitted you to travel at age 16, I think. How old were you when you went?
confess to being a little older.
Oh, were you? Oh, okay.
But it was 19 going on 11.
Well, still.
I mean, you all know, we're very protected young women in Egypt, so, you know.
Okay, so, but they let you go, they let you travel.
It's an eye-opener.
They let you travel miles to Moscow.
They did.
Live alone.
They did.
Did they face criticism about, one, encouraging you to be a professional dancer, and two, for allowing you this kind of freedom?
Well, I think that there's a bit of conflicting opinion here. My father and I battled up and down and sideways, let me tell you, for him to allow me to become a professional dancer. This was all fine and well for a little girl to go and take ballet classes. You know, there were private studios, and that's the way I started. But to go to a school started by the Ministry of Culture of Egypt with a professor from the Bolshoi, and go every day, and then I'd have to go to school in the morning. And my father was very much against it when it became obvious that I was, as you say, so passionately attached to this that nothing else would do in my life, but I must dance. And of course, at the time, I imagined dancing off into the sunset. That sunset came much sooner than expected. And so I thank my father, in retrospect, may he rest in peace, for having had the foresight to push me through with my education as well as the ballet. I mean, he said, he finally got so tired of all the fighting, he said, okay, but no education, no ballet. And of course, I used to get very tired going to school and then going and working out and all that took hours. So he said, you know, I am taking a grave social risk, because he was a very prominent academic and the pioneer of agricultural education in Egypt, very well-known gentleman, still well remembered, many years later. So the idea of his daughter becoming a professional dancer, you know, in a society where in general this is viewed as, you know, being equal to the world's most ancient profession, you know, engaging in dance is a terrible thing. Public woman showing her legs, all the rest of that. This was awful. However, he used to go to the opera house for every single performance and stand in the lobby and receive everybody's congratulations. So he was conflicted too. So that went very nicely, but he did push me through with my education, as I say. I'm very glad of that. I could tell you other things about the to and fro, because we did get the Order of Merit, proudly from President Nasser, who came and attended a performance and awarded dancers the Order of Merit from the state. The first time in the history of Egypt, and maybe the Middle East, that dancers were being honored by the ruler. And that was fine, and yet 2 years later we were traveling to Moscow for an international ballet competition, and when we applied for passports in the Mugamma, which is this notorious central building which those of you familiar with Egypt and its bureaucracy can know only too well, the employee there said the Ministry of Culture had issued us passports, and it said ballet, raqis ballet dancer. Profession. So this employee took one look at that and said, well, I can't issue you visas until you get a clearance from the morals police. You have to go to the police al-adab, because all dancers, musicians and singers being of this class cannot be trusted to go abroad and misrepresent Egypt unless their morals are clear. So my father, in a rage, tore up the passport and threw it away, and went to his friend who was the head of passports and got me a new passport which said student, university student. And he said, don't you ever dare say you're a dancer on any official document after that. So that's, you know, a bit of a dichotomy, and I have other wonderful stories of this sort.
Later on you worked for the Ministry of Culture. You also, it would be nice if you could sort of talk a little bit about the school you formed. We're going to get to later, don't worry, we haven't forgotten.
Yes, I'm a bit concerned.
But you formed this ballet school?
No, I did not.
Oh,
No, I never formed a ballet school. I was part of the ballet school. I came back from the United States to become the dean of the Higher Institute of Ballet and a professor at the Higher Institute of Ballet, which was my alma mater. So I was the first graduate of that institute to become dean and be responsible. And then I was also the first director of the new Cairo Opera House in Egypt. So that's why I said I went through several metamorphoses in my career, always taking different directions. So
Okay.
where were we going with that?
Well, basically, I was wondering what did you have other hurdles through, you know, did the Ministry of Culture give you other hurdles? How did you work with folk dance? Did you
Actually not. Yeah, no, we did. I mean, at the time, you see, they were terribly proud of the Ballet Institute. I mean, this was a different time in Egypt. And I would like to say that I would hope to see it continue, but with the trends as they are going today, it may very well be that instead of you know, being a famous Egyptian dancer, they'll be calling for me to be stoned or something.
well, actually, I
Who
know.
knows? I'm rather strict about these.
Actually, Magda, you're a little bit of a heroine among those people in the entire region, actually, who are aware of ballet and classical forms. I once said to some friends that I had just seen Magda, and there was this awe. I could have said I just lunched with Obama, you know. So you are among people who are aware of classical traditions and who value them. You're still, you know, quite a heroine, although there probably are people who would still stone you, God forbid.
Well, it did disturb me in the 80s when this whole fundamentalist movement started getting going. Among other things, I saw a letter to the editor of the newspaper that said that all the ballet dancers should be sent to the Mufti, who is the one who ratifies the death sentences. So ballet dancers were, this was in the 80s. I mean, the opera house is thriving, and this is a country of now contradictions, people who view it one way and people who view it the other. The opera house is still going, they still have festivals, but as I say, the country is now in turmoil. I shouldn't be too bleak about it, maybe it's you know, just a passing phase. And after all, we are a culture that has absorbed many influences, and I like to think that classical ballet is a bit of an international art form. And in fact, one of the most telling experiences, if I may take a moment just to recount this, because it was, I think, the singular most moving experience in my life as a professional dancer. It was not at the Cairo Opera House or in the Bolshoi Theatre or in, you know, the Kirov or anything like that. It was in Aswan. And it was after we had come out with this first ballet, The Fountain of Bakhchisarai, that somebody in the Ministry of Culture had the brilliant idea that since we had been honored by the president and it was such a sensation, this first appearance of the Egyptian ballet in Cairo, that we should take it to the far corners of Egypt, and they sent us off to Aswan. So without going into the details of the experience, which was quite interesting, we were rather terrified, because this is, after all, the bastion of conservatism in Upper Egypt. And it was an unbelievable success. It was so successful with the audience at this Palace of Culture that people followed us around in the streets, and we were all heroes. Now, my own personal experience was after the performance. I was still in my outfit as the Princess Maria, was abducted out of Crimea. Anyway, I was still in this virginal white and with blonde hair, believe it or not, and my coach was giving me, you know, the rundown on my performance. And I became aware of somebody standing next to me, and when Mr. Zhdanov had left, I saw this old man. He was a rather grimy old man in a Galilei, a palace of culture is open to all. And somehow this old chap had wandered in. And he stood next to me and was just staring at me with open eyes. And so I sort of broke the spell by addressing him in Arabic. And maybe he thought I shouldn't speak any language that he understood. And I said, "Aywa, I'm if you have it." I'm like, "Oh, uncle, you know,
What's
anything?"
up?
And he looked at me and he started crying. And he said, "يا سلام يا ست، يا سلام، أما دي حاجة جميلة." Oh, lady, I mean, this was so beautiful. And if I'd had my wits about me, I'd have given a great big hug, but I suppose that would have been a cultural norm. But I was so touched, you know, by this man that he became my mantra, in a sense, for my life. That this illiterate peasant from Upper Egypt, from the far reaches of Upper Egypt, had somehow followed. Well, it was an easy story to follow. It was all passion and love and death and war, and it went down big with the audience. But he followed it. He understood it, as did the audience. And instead of walking out, he wanted to come closer to this magic. And so he got himself up on the stage and got close to me, because I was the only one left on stage, and expressed himself. And so that's why I believe that, well, ballet is an international art, and it can be accepted, has been accepted in many cultures, all the way from the courts of the King of France to Russia to Mongolia to China to wherever, that it would work in the Middle East. And indeed, it is very popular with Cairo audiences. So there is this dichotomy, this, the same as with the Oriental dance. I mean, this enjoyment of dance, but it's in a sense a bit of a guilty enjoyment because it's not quite the right thing. Yes, you know what I'm talking about. And so people come. We have munaqaba ladies now, ladies with the full niqab, bringing their little girls to the ballet school or showing up at the opera house. So it's still, you know, they're still conflicted about it and haven't made up their minds. But this old man at least made me think that this is what my life was about. And that was what I wanted to dedicate myself to. But this kind of dancing is widespread in the Arab world. And then we went south from Massamatouh, where we filmed the Haggana, to see the oasis of Siwa. This is also a very peculiar dance form. Due to the peculiar nature of the society there. Another dance which is practiced by these people in Siwa, which may be of African origin and brought to Siwa through the slave trade. The earlier one has another much more complicated history, which I can't recount.
Do women have a role in this one?
No, just women dance in the seclusion of their harem. I left along another form of female dancing, of course, is this Shamadan with my friend Nazla. We have a very famous, at least Oriental dancer, I think, Morocco, working with the audience, old friend. Nazla al-Adnan, deceased, is a remarkable example of this dancing for entertainment, but demonstrating extraordinary skills, such as performing with this candelabra on the head, balance on the head, quite heavy. Zar, which is
I don't know.
yeah. I suppose the best way to describe it would be a kind of form of exorcism, because it's based on belief in possession. There are parallels to marriage. There's a bride, and the woman here is like the high priestess of the whole thing, conducts the exorcism. So Odia, it is of definite African origin and introduced into Egypt, probably by the Sudanese, with the Sudanese influx into Egypt in the early 1900s. There may be evidence for its existence before that, but we don't know. Zikr, and this is not quite what I wanted to show you, but let's go. Zikr is devotional dance, trance dancing. Upper Egypt stick play as a prelude to the Tahtib, which is probably the most ancient martial art still practiced extant. Another one with a woman as a the parallel with the Hagala is interesting in this dance, in that you have one or several female and a much larger male core dancing in front of them. They're veiled in the same way. This is from near Aswan in Upper Egypt. It's called a kafr, which just means clapping, I guess, because the accompaniment is clapping. And the men's movement, of course, is quite remarkable. Let's just this is some of the great group dances that might go back also to ancient times. I think we can just skip that.
I hope you don't struggle with my British accent and my Anglicisms, so just shout. Just want to say thank you for inviting me to talk here. I'm in day 6 of an 8-day trip to the States. I'm really enjoying myself here. It's my second time here. I really like it. Love the enthusiasm. The dancing here is great. But most importantly, I feel very inexperienced and humbled to be in the presence of Miss Najwa and Miss Magda. So
I just want to. I also Magda. Layla told me I'm not. I'm not a scholar. But what I mean, what we're really interested in hearing is your personal story and some of the challenges you faced becoming a dancer, but also what your mission, kind of your overall goals in dance, and as I said, your academy has its own mission, as well as any specifics that relate to gender and the technique and all that. So you have a lot to talk about, and thank you so much for being here.
No, pleasure's mine. My story obviously isn't finished. I'm kind of in the middle of it right now. I'm living through it. I'm still facing problems and adversity, even to come and sit and be with you here today. I have difficulties, but I get great pleasure out of what I do as well. And I'm kind of amazed that I'm sitting here right now sharing this story with you, which is just, my life experience. I'm not old, I'm not wise or anything, but, I've been through a lot of things, I guess. I'm doing things that most of my peers in the Arab community don't do, and, maybe they look down on me. At the same time, maybe they're jealous, maybe they admire me for doing what I do. But the most important thing that I feel I do and that I strive to do is to give that space to Arab women to come and enjoy their culture in diaspora, which is what I'm doing now through my classes, my education, my training with them. For me, performance is kind of on the side and to show people what I do, but I'm more about the education of dance and preserving a culture. I do actually come from 2 different cultures. My mother's English. I was born and raised in the UK. My father is of Arab Iranian descent. He was born in Iran. We're kind of, I guess what you could call us as Iraqi Iranians. There's a lot of crossover. My family come from Ahwaz, which is a largely Arab city in the south of Iran, next to the border of Iraq. The language spoken is Iraqi, Mesopotamian Arabic, as well as Persian as well. So I was brought up with 2 main cultures and a whole lot of mix-up in my father's culture as well. This kind of great mix of Gulf, Arab, Iranian, Iraqi thing. So, and I feel really lucky, and you know, I didn't know I was going to become a dancer. I just kind of did become one. You know, all us girls, we love dancing, and you know, we admire all the asset that we see, but we never think we're going to become one. And I certainly didn't think I was going to become one. I was, you know, 6 years into a career in the city, consulting in culture, working between the UK and Vietnam, travelling back and forth, been to university. You know, Dad was really, really happy with me, with what I was doing. My mum was, yeah, great, okay, so we've done the university, done the job, next is to get married and have children kind of thing. And then it all came to a stop. And for some reason or another, I stopped working. I had this lump sum of money, I'd been paid off, and I just started going to Egyptian dance classes in London. And my first class was a disaster, as I was telling Nicole. I went with an Iraqi friend of mine. We're expecting to kind of have a bit of a workout, learn a bit more about our dance in a professional way. And we found we were the only 2 Arab girls there in a class full of English ladies who were all very nice, but it just wasn't what we expected, and it wasn't right for us. It just doesn't work. It's very different when you've come from knowing something and studying with people who know nothing about it but are so enthusiastic at the same time. And I find that with my students as well. You know, my Arabic students who come to me, and maybe I had this slight touch of arrogance as well. You know, what are you going to teach me about belly dance? You know, what are you going to teach me that I don't know already? So you have that, but it's a case of putting those brakes on, stripping back that knowledge, but keeping it in mind, and then training them up properly. So yeah, and then I started training with different teachers, and eventually I found my teacher, who I still train with today, who is Egyptian himself. He's a fantastic teacher. So yeah, I had this kind of bunch of money, and I had free time on my hands, and I thought, I'm going to do something. And I started to train more and more in dance, and then I kind of fell into teaching it, which I didn't expect. I started performing before I was teaching in showcases, and then people would ask me to teach them, because a lot of people appreciated that in the West, it's best to learn from the source if you can. But what source is there, apart from a couple of Egyptian teachers? So I got asked to teach. I started teaching privately. I didn't teach publicly. And then after that, I thought, well, I need to get some classes going. And then as soon as I opened my classes, all these Arab women came out of the woodwork, and they started coming to my classes, and it's fantastic. Because they kind of affirmed that I was doing the right thing in terms of technique, and also giving them an outlet. Not only did I have Arab women, I had Muslim women, Asian women, African women, Jewish women, women who wouldn't necessarily get out of their houses to go to another exercise class or dance class or something social. So they used to come along, and they'd be like, it's my 1 hour of the week where I get to leave the kids and come and do something that I really enjoy. And I learned so much from these women as well, and I still do, and I adore watching them. So that's kind of what I have done in the past. Where I'm at today is I took a step back. I kind of put Egyptian on hold, and I found out Iraqi dance was really popular in the West. Sadly, partly because of the invasion of Iraq, and all these Iraqis had left Iraq and wanted to see something that was nostalgic and not just belly dance. Belly dance has its place, believe me, but they wanted something more. And I'd known this dance for years, like I'd done it in parties and, you know, very socially, but I never thought that people would want to learn it. First of all, I think that's completely different, you know, but they did. I'm amazed that, you know, I'm kind of teaching it, and it's kind of taken over Shaki, but I still have a special place in my heart for Shaki. I absolutely love it. So, I sit here today, and a lot of you might find this hard to believe, but my father actually doesn't know what I do. And I found out 2 weeks ago that he uses the internet now. Oh my God. Yeah, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. Actually, I think the thing about my father is more disappointment than anger. If he did find out, it would be more like what you did give up in order to do this, as opposed to what you're doing. So I had that to deal with. Actually, a few years ago, I was teaching a class kind of down the road from one of his restaurants, and it was 6 o'clock at night, which is when my day starts usually. And I had a big bag on me, Pineapple Studios written on it, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to work." And he said, "Dressed like that?" I think I was in like leggings and a sweatshirt or something. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just teaching an exercise class." And then I kind of ran away. And I was like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" And he never mentioned it after that. Yeah. So the thing about my dad is, he will never say anything up front to me if he's unhappy with something. He will say it in a very roundabout fashion and make me feel extremely guilty. So who knows? I don't know what's going to happen. The other challenge I face right now is my partner, my fiance, is Arabic, from a Bedouin family, a respected musician, very well known in his community, originally from Kuwait, born and raised there, with a Palestinian mother. So I have that challenge as well, and that's why you'll find no videos of me on YouTube, but apart from one that a lady took, which I've allowed her to keep on there, because it brings me a lot of clients. But yeah, I face a lot of hassle through that. Ironically, I actually met my fiance kind of through my job. Well, I met him through his job, and then it took a couple of years of chasing and love notes and that kind of stuff, and finally bit the bullet. But yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here right now, and my photo on the Al-Wan website caused a lot of problems, but hey, you had to know what you were coming to discuss, and I think that photo kind of sums up, or one of the photos, the photo of me dancing, sums up what I'm doing here, what I'm talking about, and the issues that I face, and maybe I'm a bit blasé about it. Maybe I won't eventually get married and have kids, but I'm torn, you know, and I love what I do, and my justification is, if I didn't do what I do, a lot of women would miss out, and a lot of people would know about our culture, and they would just associate the Middle East with guns and violence and war and all this kind of stuff, and not that we actually, you know, we're people and we have art and we enjoy things and we have a culture and history, and I think it's really important to show that. So I came here and I taught 2 workshops so far, and the reception has been amazing, and I'm still kind of like, what is this interest in Iraqi dance? I know I love it, but I was brought up with it. But I still want to know what people find so fascinating about it. But I'm flattered at the same time, and I'm kind of in awe as well, because I feel like I hope I'm doing it justice. It's funny, because as I'm getting more popular, I'm performing less, because I do have this embarrassment about what I do. Like if I'm talking to an Arab, actually I'm sitting next to a sheikh in at dinner a few weeks ago, and he said to me, "So what do you do?" And I said, "I do exercise classes for women," which I kind of do, but it's not the exact truth. And he said, "Wow, that's great, that's fantastic." You know, he probably imagines us like dressed very conservatively with the deaf playing at the most, and you know, and women getting fit. But one thing I do strive to do is, and you know, Mark and people who've been to my workshops will attest to this, is it's not just a dance education, or sorry, it's not just dance training, it's a dance education. And I want people to know the background, and I'm very realistic about it, and I'm under no illusions about the reputation of Eastern dancers with Arabs, and I think it's important that everybody else knows that as well. So if you're going to perform it, you need to know what people think about you, and you need to show yourself and the dance you're portraying in the best light. So I do say things that are controversial, and I even have my own thoughts about belly dance as well. There's a lot of great practitioners of it, but there's a lot of mispractice of it as well. And that's not just Westerners, that's Arabs themselves. We haven't done ourselves a lot of favours. I'm sure you know about that. And the whole concept of what I do, which is gypsy dance, you know, let's not beat about the bush. There's a lot of prostitutes that do it, you know, as a front. So, you know, I kind of between these scales, I guess, trying to keep a balance. So yeah, I don't know if you'd like to answer any questions.
At this point, I'm speechless. I mean, I don't want to bring me here to be speechless, but I think the courage that both Magda and her time and Leila now are showing is incredible. You know, I mean, you're living at home, right?
No.
Oh, you're not living at home, okay. But does your mother know?
My mother knows what I do.
And she's okay with it?
She doesn't know to the full extent what I do, but she's very supportive. She wants me to be happy in whatever I do, and as long as I pay my bills and don't go running back to her for money when it all goes wrong, then
I mean, just tremendous courage, I think. You know, to do this and a great service.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the Egyptian dance is very sweet and nice and charming and flirty, and Iraqi dance is the opposite, but in our culture it has the same effect. You know, it's very feminine. It's all about the hair and the body, but it's just the kind of semantics of it are just completely different. Egyptian dance is often very hip-based and very feminine, this kind of thing. Egyptian was much more, Iraqi is much more aggressive, where there are shoulder shimmies, they're very aggressive, and hip shimmies are very aggressive. And those are the only two moves that are really shared in the two dances. The rest of it is completely different. Most of the moves in Iraqi come from here, so from the hair. I mean, the hair, obviously in the Middle East, is a huge sign of beauty, you know, coveted. And these gypsies have amazingly long hair. I don't have such long hair, but they have this amazingly long hair, you know, sometimes down to here, dead straight. And this is like their prized possession, you know. So maybe if Mark can show a head spin, we can see in front of these bright lights.
There's a big Iraqi hair spin that's like a figure eight, that's on a slant, I call it that.
Yeah.
But it's all it is, it's this.
And there's a lot of it, and
There's
it goes
a lot of
on
it.
and on
On and
and on. So that's the head spin. Now, in a social setting, it's not really a done thing. It's quite showy, and also it's still Kauliya dance. Kauliya means gypsy, and it's not actually an Iraqi dance. It's been adopted by Iraqis. It's gypsies who happen to be in Iraq and Syria who practice it, and it only kind of got adopted by Iraqis after they left Iraq after the invasion, then they were like, ah, that's our dance now. And that's what they were looking for in their weddings and shows. So it's not actually an Iraqi dance. Many people still say that, many Iraqis still say it's not Iraqi dance. You know, it's not traditionally Iraqi, but it's been going on for so long now. And these women are, you know, they're struggling, you know, to make a living and, you know, get by and survive. And this is what they have and this is what they use, you know, to get through life. And these women are commonly raped, they're prostitutes, they're trafficked, you know, they might go to Syria, they might go to Lebanon, they might go to Jordan. And I do have like a little bit of guilt as well because I'm kind of profiteering from that, but also I don't want people to forget about these people and, you know, that does go on. And people, like when I was talking about this in the workshop, people were shocked and like, it still goes on, and I was like, yeah, it still goes on. In fact, more now because of what's going on in Syria, you know, they would have moved on from there or had to move about, you know, it's suddenly become unstable again. The music in a social setting is also much slower, doing tak tak, doing tak tak, this kind of stuff. So we would, because Iraqi and Gypsy dance kind of feel off each other, there's a lot of shared moves. So we would just do this forward and back step, okay, which is very Gypsy. They would put much more energy into it, okay, with bare feet, by the way, not high heels like I've got on, okay. But in the social settings, it's more like this, okay? So this is the basic move. As I said, the hair stuff doesn't happen, okay? Shimmy's fine here. I wouldn't do it here in a social setting. I would only shimmy here. The men can do it, however, which is really unfair. So I was at a party recently for Valentine's, an Iraqi Valentine's party, and my fiancé was dancing the whole time, mocking what we do as women, but doing it really well actually. But I can't do it, you know, and it's like, everyone's saying, come on, dance, 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 you know, my close friends, and I'm like, no, I don't feel well, you know, oh, I'm tired. There's all these excuses that Arab girls make up, you know how it is. So it's just like this all the time, you know, it's very, very relaxed and casual. You just can't get straight into it. And it's the same with Sharky, you know, you can't show the full force of what you can do. Whether you're a professional dancer or not, it doesn't matter. You know, many Arab girls are as good, if not better, than professional dancers. The only difference is they get paid for it, you know. But when you're in the ideal space to do it, you can't. You just can't. It's so attention grabbing, and whether you're a professional dancer or not, it just doesn't matter. So that's kind of the main two moves of Iraqi cavalier dance. You have the hairspin and you have the forward and back, okay? And there's lots of jumps, but broadly speaking, it's not a very complicated dance. It's reasonably simple. It's just extremely difficult and energetic. And you need to know the cultural baggage that goes with it to be able to perform it properly. There's a lot of bad music out there. There's a lot of innuendo-ridden music out there as well. You know, there's a lot of music that's not serious enough to be performed to, but that's popular for people to listen to. So whilst there's a wealth of videos on YouTube and you can glean so much information, how do you know what's right or wrong? You don't. That's why you need to study with someone who knows what they're doing. And I don't know it all, and I still have to ask questions as well. But, you know, hopefully I know enough to guide people in the right way and I share all the information I have. You know.
It's a dance that you use knives with? Or?
Ah, yes, okay.
So is that, do only women use knives? I mean, that's a pretty...
Knives are quite prominent all over the Gulf, in Iraq and Iran. You know, in Iran you have a dance with one knife, which you would tease the groom with to get money out of him.
It's the knife.
Yeah. Okay, so they have a very flirty dance like this, an Iranian dance, and you know, they ask the groom to place money over it, and they dance for him. And they'd, instead of giving the knife and leaving him alone, they'd pass it to the next lady in the queue. They'd have a long line of all the female guests, basically. So that's one prominence. In Kaulia dance, it's 2 knives. Oh my god.
Do not want to know, it's not getting on the spot. Okay, this one's heavier though.
That's fine.
It's not, might not be easy to judge.
So, in Iraqi dance, we use daggers. We have to use knives because of safety, and blunt knives, table knives. But it's traditionally done with daggers, okay? And that comes from Iraqi culture as well as Gypsy culture. And basically what it means is, I love you so much that I'm prepared to sacrifice myself for you if I need to. I would kill myself for you. And this is the most popular thing in kind of Gypsy dance that Iraqis love. They love to, it's like the build up to that part, you know? And there's a series of, there's lots of different things you can do, but the most common one is just to stab here, okay, whilst you're moving like this. So they stab themselves. They can also stab with the hair as well, so they might be doing this, down and stab, down and stab, down and stab, and you'll see the photo of me actually on the one website doing that. So there's lots of different things. You can stab the hips like this. So many different things you can do with knives. It's just a shame we have so much health and safety nowadays that, you know, we can't walk around with antique daggers, which is a shame. So yeah, the knifing is really important in Iraqi dance.
And men would dance with knives as well, or?
Well, there is no men dancing Kaulia.
It's strictly women's.
It's women dance, it's a female dance. But there are male dances in Iraq and the Gulf where they do use hijab.
I mean, it's interesting, like in Egyptian street dance, the men manipulate the knives and throwing them, you know, and women would never do that. I mean, a proper woman would never do that. So it's
exactly. Yeah. And the knife is also used to tease the groom in weddings. Did you see that at all? No? I think actually, you know, Kaulia has kind of become more popular outside of Iraq than in Iraq, and it's relatively secretive within Iraq. You know, it's in their own communities, and just like a lot of the Gulf dances are as well. You know, they're all kind of behind closed doors, and you know, to know a gypsy is quite controversial, and to be associated with them, it's like you've got to hire a gypsy to come and do it. You know, whereas here, you hire a regular person to come and do it, you know, she knows it. So, yeah, but the knife dance is used to tease the groom. Yeah.
So you learned all of this in England?
No, I learned some of it in Iran because it's
Oh, I mean, did you ever
the
live
region.
Oh, sorry, in Iran?
Right, no, I never lived there, but I've been there many times, and also just I was brought up in the UK around that community and seeing it. Yeah,
It's amazing. And the communities in diaspora. I mean, okay, you've got ballet in diaspora, Egypt, really.
Yeah.
You know, ballet outside of its context, and here is Iraqi folk dancing, really, outside and Sharqi, outside of their context in England, which is just one comment that I found. I had a few years ago, one of my cousins had said that they went to nightclubs in Syria, and I went, women are allowed to go to nightclubs. Well, yeah, but we dance differently. We hold our hips still, and we move the top part of the body, which I always thought was a very clever adaptation. You know, and then you can go out, you can do it, and you can do it in public, and it's okay because you're holding your hips still. Whereas, you know, in a party, in a wedding party, or women's party, at home, you wouldn't be. You know, but because you're doing this in public, and what Layla said was, well, I wouldn't do this at a party. This is what I would do in class or at home.
I think it's funny, probably actually my students see a more Arab side to me through dance than my own family do. And I just came back from Jordan like 3-4 weeks ago, and you know, with my fiance being a musician, his brother's a musician as well. He's quite a big drummer in Jordan, and we had all the family around. There was about 20 of us, and they kind of got their instruments out, the oud and the darbuka, and they started playing. And then they looked at me and they said, "Oh, you're going to get up and dance, you know, show us what you know from the UK." You know, made up the usual excuses, you know, I'm tired from traveling and all these things. And then, you know, all the kids got up, and it's great to see them. And there's also a little kind of jealousy, you know, because they have that innocence and they can just let go and go for it, and you just can't. As you know, as soon as you hit kind of 12, 13, that's it. You don't want to show your body in front of men. It's just not appropriate, and but it's nice that the kids are doing it as well. You know, better than it all stops.
Especially the Iraqi or Rajshahi forms, because this, you know, ballet is more, it's the limbs that are in movement and the torso, but more focused on the limbs, whereas in Shari it's really more the torso and the hips and coming from. So did ballet how do you think that affects its performance and perception, and not sure if you want to comment on any of that. I mean, because look at a ballet costume. It's very revealing, but it's that best. I mean, it's still accepted in certain circles, maybe because it's a foreign form, or maybe because it's a different use of the body. I just was wondering what your take on that was.
Well, let you start. Let's see where this leads us.
Well, a major issue with ballet is that it is a classical form that comes from Europe. So one, Egypt's been colonized, and especially at the time that Magda was dancing, Europe was highly respected. And the tremendous amount of training that goes into ballet, you know, I mean, the classical forms take a tremendous amount of training, you know, and that sort of makes them a little bit elite. But again, there are people who, I've seen Arabs who are horrified by ballroom dancing, because men or women are holding each other in public. Not that they don't hold each other, but they shouldn't be doing it in public. That's really the worst of the worst. And ballet, as you said, is very revealing. So I think, I mean, that, as Magda was saying, it's really nice that people can get taken in by the performance. But if you have the sense that a rakasa is a rakasa is a rakasa, you know, as Magda said, there is an ambivalence about dancing. Everybody dances in the society, everybody. You know, you have to try not to dance. Yeah. But the idea is you do this at home. You know, you do this within your friends. You do this within, if they're not at home, they should be gender segregated, you know, do it with other women. So, I mean, we're all confused. I mean, not we're all confused about this, but I think what Leila's talking about, you know, it doesn't work in the West in the same way. You don't have the same boundaries in the West. And it's okay if you cross those boundaries, you know. And in the Middle East, so long as you stay within the boundaries, you're fine. I don't know who wants this.
Two different dance forms. But this sort of speaks to the politics of respectability and the fact that in a lot of cases when you think about Arab women dancing, there is that, that limitation of, oh, you have to because of economic circumstances or whatever circumstances that leads to, you know, a ra'asa is a ra'asa. So how do you feel that by being people who could choose to dance, like, you know, it seems that both of you came from backgrounds where you could have chosen to do a lot of things, that you can extend the politics of respectability and show people that this can be a valid choice as opposed to something that you're compelled to do?
Of course, I never intended to become some kind of symbol for anything. I just happened to be mad about ballet because I started as a child and loved it. But you understand, I mentioned at the beginning of this talk the cultural complexion of time. As I said, I was born in a time and place and circumstance which allowed this. I think it would be far more difficult in Egypt today. we must recognize that in Egypt at the time there was a huge foreign community. I mean, I talked about the Suez Canal and the boom in Egypt. Well, this brought in huge communities of foreigners to live in Egypt, and Egyptian society at a higher level also sort of adapted to Western ways. But I like to liken it in a sense to oil and water, you know, this sort of veneer of Western culture. And then, of course, the very ancient traditional culture. Now, they have merged in places, and there's been a bit of you know, flux going on between the times. I found acceptance, you know, even at the level of this old man that I spoke about, which so touched me, you know, still does these many years later. And then, of course, there's been the opposite. You know, the outright rejection of it all. Now, I mean, most of the foreign community has left Egypt, and there's a certain homogeneity to the society, and it's almost as if the tide had turned and Egypt were being sort of drawn back into the Middle East, a Middle Eastern culture. And there's this rejection of Western mores, per se. So, but I'm still confused by the acceptance that the Western arts have. As I said, you know, when you see a fully veiled lady bringing her little daughter to the ballet, or a fully veiled lady coming to the opera house and enjoying it tremendously, or in the sense of a colleague of mine who teaches out in the Delta, teaches art appreciation in certain universities and institutes in the Delta, where there are a lot of the, you know, or the very, very conservative Muslims now, with the girls in the full niqab and the young men with beards, and his job has been to introduce them, say, to classical ballet. And they seem to like it very much. For the most part, they watch the films and he explains the stories, and then they follow it along and seem to appreciate this. But then you have the gentleman I mentioned a little while ago who was wanting to have everybody sent off to the hangar. So there is this dichotomy, and I think it's much more apparent today than it ever was. So I can only speak to my own experience. It was a wonderful experience at the time. But I think that it's a phase that has passed, and there's a new reality to deal with. And, you know, the circumstances are much changed. So I think the culture it's going along on its own momentum for now. There's still an opera house, there's still ballet, there's still an orchestra, and so on. But you have loud cries from the conservative side of society saying that only, you know, religion-inspired art should be permitted. And so we stand on a bit of a cusp, I would believe, because if Egypt goes towards, you know, conservatism in government and there is a policy in place, then we're not too sure where all the effort that we have invested in this culture is going to end up. I just said at the beginning that ballet and Western music had taken hold in Egypt and gained a lot of acceptance. A lot of it was because there was a ballet program every week, and, you know, for many, many years, it may still be on for now, and it was public policy.
Did you want to actually move over to Leila? Do you want to answer that question?
I don't have too much more other than what I've kind of said before. I'm very confused about it all myself. You know, I do a job that, on the surface, if you look at it, even myself, I would probably slightly look down on as well. But I know what I do, and I know how I do it, and I know what I'm striving to do. And I would probably never do my job if I lived back in the Middle East. or in certain parts of the Middle East. So yeah, it's a really tricky question, because when I look at it, I do often think, like, in all sorts of aspects of my life, if my father hadn't have got on that plane and moved across, I wouldn't be in the UK today. I would probably be a completely different person, you know. So it's really quite confusing. Yeah.
But Tiffany, so your question was also related to the fact that they could choose this profession. How does that influence others
Yeah, do you think that it's changed the conversation, or how does it change how you present the conversation, that if everybody thinks, well, only bad girls dance, and you know, this is not as a value judgment, but as a stereotype, and you both are obviously like good girls, then how does that change the conversation? No offense to anyone.
I think, like, amongst my Arab customers and clients who come to me for training, they almost kind of elevate me a bit away from them. And it's like, well, she was born in the West, so it's a little bit different, you know. So I guess that I have that to fall back on as well. And it's certainly like, you know, if I did go and work in the Middle East, I would be there as a Westerner straight away, British passport, you know. So not only from the point of view of, you know, I would want to work as an Arab out there, but also that there's much more prestige being British or American or Western out there anyway. And then if you've got this interesting angle of coming from an Arabic background, it just kind of all adds to it. So yeah, I mean, I hope I kind of answered your question in a roundabout fashion. Yeah.
Talking about Egyptian theme in some of the choreographies of the ballet. So my question is basically, was that already incorporated, or did you feel motivated to incorporate the Egyptian theme into the ballet? And if this Egyptian theme was really an Eastern version or a Western, you know, idea of what the East was? So that's my question, based on some of the pictures.
Oh, well, that was I think you have a trick question.
But I just found that interesting, especially on even the picture that is showing on that was the second question, the picture showing. I found interesting that they choose that picture. I was like, I'm sure they might have different kind of pictures, but they choose that one with the leg really like on a 90-degree going, and that's
they took a lot of pictures, and this was the one. Yes.
I felt it looks like they were trying to make a statement. I don't know. That was all my.
You know, not for any other reason other than I've got a lot of rolls on my tummy, and I felt. Yeah, right. At least they could have used an airbrush on it. too many little sausages there.
They didn't have Photoshop.
For purely aesthetic reasons. That would have been it. But you know, there are different viewpoints. You know, the way people are perceived at either end. I don't know what prompted the choice of this particular photograph, or even, you know, the costume that my friend designed, but this was, you know, very, very first effort. And what I wanted to do at the time, at least for myself, was explore movement beyond classical ballet, which was my vocabulary. And see if there was some kind of dance form that we could create, like the Americans came up with modern dance, you know, starting way back as we learned with Isadora, and so on and so forth. So I didn't want to set myself up as Egyptian Isadora, but the idea was, well, what else other than classical ballet can we devise for ourselves? So that was the beginning of the exploration. I didn't go very far with my choreographic explorations at all, because then I moved on to the PhD, and it was more of a, you know, acquiring degrees, because in 1970 when the Cairo Opera House burned down, was burned down, as I mentioned a little while ago, and that was the end of my dance career, which lasted about 5.5 years, you know, under 6 years anyway, so it was very brief. So this was just trying to find another direction for myself, and at the same time, you know, try to participate in the idea of developing, quote, an Egyptian ballet, because there were clamor and calls for a truly Egyptian ballet. So I don't think too many people knew what that was about. A lot of them thought, well, if we take Rida, you know, Mahmoud Rida style choreography or the national Qawmiya and put everybody in Turk shoes, then that becomes a ballet. You know, you see this all the time, and of course that's not quite what it was about. So this was a, you know, a bit of a personal odyssey, and just taking me beyond what I had perceived, you know, to be my life in dance, which was to be a professional dancer until I dropped dead. But that didn't happen. I'm still here. So I have to find other things to do. So yes, I think this was the title actually was An Exploration in Modern Idiom of Egyptian Themes. So then, of course, what do? We go back to Isis and Osiris and ancient Egypt and look into that. And what I did was challenge myself, not in this dance, but this was just a tentative beginning, because believe me, the first time I was in a studio by myself and told to create a dance, it was a terrifying experience. I mean, you must understand, I performed choreography that had been set, you know, in the last century. So it was established choreography being passed on to me by our Russian teachers. So to try and create movement myself, it turned out to be very frightening. Anyway, I locked myself up in the studio and decided I would not use a single movement from the ballet vocabulary. So the Isis and Osiris, you know, this whole thing, and I thought of a larger work, but that never happened. But anyway, the Morning Isis was a dance which I also performed on the floor, which I was totally unfamiliar with, because, you know, the only relationship with the floor is you stand on your toes or you take a bow, and that's about it. But to do floor work was also quite an amazing challenge. So I thought I had, you know, acquired some kind of mastery for that, and came up with a couple of dances which everybody agreed were very promising. But then there was another attempt at the Bride of the Nile, you know, another Egyptian theme, but it was all ancient Egyptian. So it was all seeking an identity. And you know, if you're caught between two cultures, as I was, I mean, can I call myself an acculturated Egyptian simply because I'm more sort of in the Western mold than in the Egyptian one? Or am I just, you know, part of this many-layered culture which is still acquiring layer upon layer? And as my good friend Halim al-Daba, the composer, God bless him, said, scratch an Egyptian and you'll find an ancient Egyptian. You just keep scratching. It goes deep. So I'm happy to attribute this quote to him, since it's obviously very successful. He's 92 years old and still very strong. And there is an ancient Egyptian.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 2 more quick questions.
After what Yowalka asked you, now I'm curious, what happened with your choreography? Is it documented anywhere? Was it filmed?
No, not really. I mean, these were just attempts to prove a point.
But have you know, is it written down?
I didn't really do enough of the choreography to be sort of worth.
There's no film of it? Nothing?
Yes, I think I have a couple of videos of the.
I mean, when I'm ready, to watch it. I think it's important.
This is.
We'll have another event.
You're using
we'll
one.
Have
that's how it's pure mixing of cultures. You're using one, like what Halim does. You know, like taking the training in one culture and mixing it with your national tradition, and that makes a third thing. That's what Brazil does. That's what the U.S. does. It's like, you know, European music and African music creates a third way. So
Well, we were trying, I mean, my life has been dedicated, I don't want to sort of take over the conversation here, but my own life I thought would be dedicated to ballet because this was my love. When the question came up of, well, now we've got to sort of make it part of Egyptian culture, we can't be doing Giselle and Don Quixote and all the traditional, ballets, which the Russians came and produced for us. And I must, not forget to pay tribute to the remarkable teachers that came to Egypt and established this institute over many years, because they were very dedicated teachers, and we owe them a great debt. They brought this school up in next to no time to a very respectable standard. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case, but we'll hope that this is maybe a cultural revolution that will, recover itself. So this was just, trying to prove a point that you don't take thriller stuff and put it on point and say, voila, I've created dance tradition. Ballet is an international art form. It has found its home in many places. I mean, we always say associated with Russia, and yet the Russians got it from France, the French got it from the Italians, and so on and so forth. So, it's been evolving over many centuries, as you're all aware. So it's gone to countries as far away as Mongolia and found roots. So what were the roots in our country? That was what many of us were trying to prove. So this was my way of saying, okay, this is one approach to choreography. But I didn't pursue it because, as I said, I reinvented myself several times and life took me in many directions. So I came here, and by the time I got back to Egypt, the whole scene had changed and the whole endeavor had almost collapsed. The Ballet Institute and the company and everything that went with it. Because the minister was no longer there, Nasser was no longer there, it was a whole different scene. And the ballet today, I mean, you see most of the dancers in the nightclubs and weddings and so on. So when we try to keep it as an elite form, in a sense, and preserve an integrity for this as theatrical dance, it has fallen upon hard times. But it's still there, which is hopeful.
Well, we can have another event where we screen.
I was wondering if each of you would speak. We've kind of, I think, touched this huge subject in ways, but I wondered if what might come if each of you spoke directly to the question of how have processes of colonialism affected your dance careers. And so I mean that both like institutionally in terms of kind of the how it comes to be that there can be a national ballet company in Egypt, for example, and then questions of diaspora, of course, but also in terms of the politics of representation and sort of the way that hierarchies of aesthetic practices become structured. And that's huge, I know.
I need another except very briefly. But I think I addressed it earlier by talking about the many layers of culture we have, and the way you choose to look at it. Shall we say it all started with Napoleon? That this phase of Egypt, and now it's winding down to something else, or returning to an earlier Egypt. The opera house in Cairo was built for an event, Suez Canal opening, a grand inauguration, a magnificent world event. It's been very active, remains very active, but I really cannot tell you where this is all going to lead. It's anybody's guess. I think I'd better not try to pursue this too much further. I think we'll leave it to you to answer.
Maybe.
I mean, it's...
Leila or Najwa, if you have a little comment. And then,
I think Najwa is probably...
if you have a thought, I mean,
observer.
You have lots of wonderful thoughts that you've expressed.
An
I
objective observer.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. It is a really huge question.
Colonialism, representation.
It's a really good question, and I don't feel that I could give it justice by answering it. I don't think I have the right answers. There's also a lot of politics involved, which I try not to talk about in public. I have a lot of personal views about politics and colonialism, and might not be appropriately shared right now. So, yeah, I don't think it's right for me to answer. Yeah, maybe Nigel.
Well, I mean, if Egypt hadn't been colonized, you wouldn't have an opera house, you wouldn't have ballet. Okay, in Yemen, which wasn't colonized, you don't have ballet. Okay, but there is, I love this Magda thing about if you scratch the skin, you know, you're going to fly. We're all that way. I mean, we grew up, I mean, those of us who grew up dressing like Americans, when we came to the States, we found out we weren't American, right? There's something else. The food we like is different. The things we joke about are different. You know, boundaries are a little bit here and there, which doesn't mean that there's no communion, you know, no way to communicate across boundaries. There are. I mean, you know, this is, we've all traveled, we've all something else. But I think there are things, I'm one of the few anthropologists these days who dares talk about authenticity. But I think there is such a thing, and Rocky talks about that, way deep down somewhere, you know, there's something called Arab that makes me fight with my American husband. He has certain assumptions, and I go, how can you possibly even think that, you know? And he'll turn around and he'll go, what are you doing? I mean, 35 years later, not so much, but there are cultural differences and cultural authenticities, and I think those are important to deal with, and I think this is what we're all negotiating. You know, whether, you know, you're an American doing Ratsharki, or an Egyptian doing ballet, or an Iranian doing what maybe she shouldn't be doing, but she is. She loves it. No, I'm saying, you know, the way you're, you know, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? You're crossing boundaries, you know. So I don't know if that answers the question.
A lot of the time in Egypt, I mean, it was the thing, and it wasn't only in Egypt, other countries as well, where they were influenced by a sort of imported culture, that you turned around and despised the native culture in Egypt.
Well, that's the
And you know, we would say that you know, Egyptians are up sort of the melody. That's, you know, common stuff. Yeah, local. So that they kind of emphasize this differentiation between themselves, the acquired culture that they have and the traditional culture, instead of maybe trying to you know, embrace both of them in oneself and be able to be a part of this and a part of that. You know, in terms of a personal experience, just traveling around Egypt making this film. I mean, my experience of Egypt was Cairo and Alexandria in the summer. Yeah, you know, it's very Western and so on and so forth. Traveling around the Egyptian desert, the Egyptian countryside, into lesser towns, there was a whole voyage of discovery for me. It was really finding out about that. And finding out how open the Egyptians were to receiving and embracing somebody who came from the city and a totally different cultural background to themselves. They somehow were more open and welcoming than the upper crust were to them. But I can't think that today it's the same situation. I think there's a lot of fragmentation in society has occurred. But of course, I've been away from Egypt for many years now, and so therefore what I speak of is the past. And the current situation in Egypt is still very much in flux and having to resolve this.
Well, I think I know Morocco and Mark have